Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, July 19th, 2019. Some numbers repeating today. Good morning. We are ready for yet another show, or that is to say, it's time for one anyway. We're here. I'm here. You're here. Doesn't that make it our time? You do the show. How about that? You thought you were getting pizza out of that one. No, not going to happen. Not this way. It's too early anyway. Although, breakfast pizza, how bad could it really be? Quite honestly, toast, cheese happens in your eggs all the time. Tomatoes, it's an omelet, basically. Just no eggs and on a bread base, right? So let's give it a shot. Daily Co's Radio is live now. Let's figure out what we're going to do. For a change of pace, Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, will commemorate tomorrow's 50th anniversary of the moon landing. Ah, yes. By taking one small step for man, one giant leap for the last donut before that darn kid gets it. Good idea, Bill. Thanks for sending us your morning tweet. The kids aren't up and about yet. I could beat them very easily to the last donut, but, we had the last donut probably a couple of days ago. So, it's been too hot. Can't go out to the store. Donut shops are very hot. I don't know. We're out, and the kids are getting to that age where they begin sleeping until the afternoon sometimes, although the younger one still gets up and plays video games and squeaks in his chair during the show, and we always look forward to that. So we'll probably get a little bit of that later on this morning as well. Much to catch up on as usual. It's Friday. So no set schedule, things to catch up on, stuck in pocket all week. Just to get up to speed, we'll probably have to talk about the fact that documents unsealed yesterday and revealed to the public in Michael Cohen's case in the Southern District of New York, and lots of people poring over those things, and we'll see if we can't get a hold of some of the analysis of what's in those papers. I saw people combing through them as they were coming out, but I had no interest in sifting through them as they were being released. Just didn't move me. Basically, it comes down to this: the whole Trump universe lied about who knew what when with respect to the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels and others, though there's speculation that even yet more is revealed in these papers than just that. But in case you are one of the few people in the world that believed that because Donald Trump said he didn't know anything about Michael Cohen paying off Stormy Daniels, that was true, then you're an idiot and you should punch yourself in the face repeatedly. Basically, this is the revelation that, everything everybody secretly suspected about those payoffs and about Donald Trump's knowledge of them were absolutely true. And the fact that he denied them ended up being all the confirmation you needed to know that it was true. And all you have to do, it sometimes varies how long you have to wait to find out, but you'll always find out in the end that if Donald Trump denies knowledge of something incriminating, because it was in fact a criminal act, if he denies knowledge of something incriminating, if you wait long enough, you will find out that he knew about that incriminating thing and requested, ordered, demanded that it happen. And that's what happened, basically. And once again, the Justice Department ended up having to be guided by the their policy that sitting presidents can't be indicted, and so there's really no point in going much further with this case. The ultimate outcome of this case is that Donald Trump would be indicted for campaign finance fraud, campaign finance crimes, probably along with Michael Cohen and Hope Hicks, as it turns out. And now we know how Hope Hicks does it. She simply lies to the press, and the press writes it down, and that's really all there is to it. How did she get back to me so quickly with a responsive answer? And the answer is, the press, as long as you call them back quickly, if you lie, they'll just write down your lie, and then we'll get away with it for as long as possible. And then after that, I'll just claim absolute immunity from having to answer for my crimes. And sounds like the Congress is probably going to buy that. So, okay. That's kind of the way crime goes in this country. What can you do? Hey, two Americas, yada, yada. I wish somebody had thought of that and then maybe not been such a snake himself. Anyway, that's what's happening out there in terms of the Michael Cohen case. I should probably head on over to Google and search out news for that too, because as I said, I didn't have much interest in combing through the story, or rather combing through the paper as it came out. So let's see. Right. On the congressional front, of course, we have the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, demanding, so here it goes, it's all going to happen now, according to The Hill, demanding that Hope Hicks clarify her closed-door testimony. So she's going to get a chance to come in and say, I'm sorry, did I say we didn't know about it? We did know about it. Okay, and then everybody will say, darn it. And what can you do? That's just going to be the way it goes. But we demand that she testify, and we'll see whether she agrees that Jerry Nadler's right and that she must testify. And when she does not agree, we will issue her a subpoena, and then they'll fight the subpoena, and then we'll appeal the fighting of the subpoena, and it'll go on and on like this until 2021, at which point it'll either be irrelevant or she will be pardoned or just continue to not show up, and we'll continue to say, we're not sure what to do because it's 2021, and if we subpoena her and enforce the subpoena, then Mike Pence will win in 2024, and what are we going to do? So you know how that goes. It's a little bit depressing. Let's see. I know that there's probably some other coverage out there. Let me grab and see what's out there for us to take a look at. These are all about the release. I would like to see some more about the analysis. I don't know. What do you think? You think Vox is going to do a good job with this? Let's see what they have to say about this one. Michael Cohen documents unsealed as Trump hush money investigation concludes. Yes, don't forget about that one. They shut everything down. And by the way, most analysis of the activity in this case would seem to indicate that it's perhaps among the 14 or what was it, 12 in the New York district alone, or 14 cases that were still ongoing when Mueller finished his report and handed things over to the Justice Department and Bill Barr. And as expected, Barr is closing all of those investigations down, and apparently the timeline of activity in this particular case reflects that almost immediately after Barr's appointment, activity at the Southern District of New York with respect to finishing up on this case ceases, and now they're just going to say, well, we're just going to have to leave it there. So, Andrew Prokop, writing for Vox here, Michael Cohen documents unsealed as Trump hush money investigation concludes. No further charges will apparently be brought in the hush money probe. What happened? And the answer apparently is that there was an announcement of the production of a new movie version of Cats, and everybody said, oh, we should talk about that, I guess, and how much we don't like the way it looks, rather than this. I don't know what it was that distracted from this case. And of course, this case was abandoned years ago by the Justice Department. The government released several search warrant documents related to their investigation of Michael Cohen on Thursday, and apparently revealed that the investigation into hush money payments made on Trump's behalf has ended. The newly unsealed documents are search warrants preceding the raids on Cohen's office and residence in April of 2018. Media organizations requested these warrants be made public, and versions of them were unsealed in March. However, back then, prosecutors requested that most of the material related to the hush money investigation be redacted because the investigation was then ongoing. It is no longer the case, of course. And prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York told Judge William Pauley in a letter this week, words to that effect. They wrote that they've effectively concluded their investigations into who else was involved in Cohen's campaign finance violations and into whether certain people made false statements or obstructed justice in connection with the probe. They did. Since there is no longer an ongoing investigation, they said most of these old warrants can now be unsealed, and I'm curious about whether any of the redacted material in the Mueller report should be unredacted, and who's in charge of that, and the answer is, I don't know, and you'll never find out. Cohen said in court last year that he broke campaign finance law to pay Stormy Daniels $130,000 at Trump's, quote, direction, and the newly unsealed documents add details to back that up. They make clear that Trump and campaign aides such as Hope Hicks were in close, frequent communication with Cohen in the time period he was arranging the payment. But the question of why exactly this investigation, which some speculated could be more dangerous to Trump than Mueller's, seems to have fizzled out in recent months and that all remains mysterious. And you could ask that question in congressional hearings, or you could not. When Cohen was sentenced last December, SDNY prosecutors, Southern District of New York, of course, prosecutors made clear they weren't yet ready to close out the investigation. It appeared the next step in the probe could involve Trump or his company, yet no significant developments in the investigation that we know of have occurred since then. And last Friday, CNN's Erica Orden and Kara Scannell, do I have that right, reported that the probe, quote, appears to be wrapping up without charges being filed. There's been no actual evidence of any political interference or foul play prompting the investigation's conclusion, and it could have been an entirely legitimate prosecutorial call going forward, but some commentators are questioning whether there could be more to the story. Here's what the documents say. To recap, first, last August, Cohen pleaded guilty for violating campaign finance law by arranging hush money payments for two women who claimed affairs with Trump, Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels. Cohen, of course, began serving a 3-year prison sentence for those crimes and bank fraud charges this May. The unsealed search warrant materials lay out investigators' understanding of the hush money investigations as of early 2018, before the raids on Cohen's office, the public revelation of the investigation's existence, and Cohen's guilty plea. The new documents can be found at links that they provide here. There are 8 exhibits. I guess we could take a look at them, but the main takeaway from the documents is that there's ample evidence that Trump and his campaign press secretary, Hope Hicks, were in close communication with Cohen as he tried to buy Stormy Daniels' silence toward the end of the 2016 campaign. I wonder from time to time whether she feels badly about having agreed to stay silent. Would have been very valuable to hear what she had to say. I guess, maybe. Who knows? Maybe it wouldn't have changed any minds at all. An FBI agent wrote that in October of 2016, in the days following the publication of the Access Hollywood tape, in which Trump bragged about groping women, Cohen exchanged a series of calls, text messages, and emails with the following people. There was Keith Davidson, that's Stormy Daniels' attorney, although he's the guy, is he the one that keeps somehow turning up as representing the women who claim affairs with Trump and to whom these women are constantly being referred by Michael Cohen? I can't recall if that's the guy or not. Let's see. Also, players in the scenario here, David Pecker and Dylan Howard of American Media Incorporated. That'd be the publisher of the National Enquirer, of course. And Donald Trump and Hope Hicks for the corporation, if you will. Anyway, so Davidson, Pecker, Howard, and Trump, and Hicks, in addition to Michael Cohen and all of this. Let's see. So there was close communication, as they said. For instance, the day after the tape was released, Access Hollywood, on October 8th, Hicks calls Cohen, and per the FBI agent, Trump joined the call. I believe this was that. How many words are in this? I believe this was that this was. That's honestly what it says. As a quote, I believe this was the first call Cohen had received or made to Hicks in at least multiple weeks, the agent wrote, for some reason. Shortly afterward, Cohen called Pecker and then received a call from Howard. Investigators surmised these discussions were about how to prevent more women from coming forward with stories about Trump. Already at this point, Cohen had worked with Pecker and Howard to pay off Karen McDougal, another woman who said she had an affair with Trump, so AMI could get exclusive rights to her story and bury it. But the Access Hollywood tapes release was the reason for the new urgency. The documents also reveal on October 26, 2016, less than 30 minutes after speaking with Trump, Cohen opened a bank account for his infamous shell company, Essential Consultants, LLC. Later that day, Cohen transferred $130,000 to the account, which he'd later used to pay Daniels. After arranging the payment for Daniels, Cohen had a brief conversation with Hope Hicks. After receiving an audio file of Daniels denying an affair with Trump, Cohen had a phone conversation with Kellyanne Conway, who was then Trump's campaign manager, and now just a lying harpy. On November 4th, 2016, Cohen texted that Trump was, quote, pissed about a Wall Street Journal article that would reveal the payment to McDougal. So, yes, this was a cover-up, and Trump was likely in the loop. He is. I mean, it says so right here. It was also a criminal cover-up. Cohen admitted knowingly violating campaign finance laws with the hush money payment. He said last year he did so at Trump's direction, and these documents appear to substantiate that claim. Next up here, what happened to the hush money investigation then? So the article continues. But the reason we're seeing all these new documents is that, per prosecutors, there's no longer an ongoing investigation that merits their continued sealing. That's a new development, because it had appeared that others, Trump Organization executives and even Trump himself, were in some legal jeopardy from the then continuing probe as recently as a few months back. For instance, Cohen claimed to have spoken to Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg about how to set up the Karen McDougal payment. I guess he didn't listen to him. Weisselberg was also involved in paying back Cohen for the money he paid Stormy Daniels. In 2017, he split the money into several monthly payments that the company falsely described as legal expenses. Prosecutors investigating the payments reportedly gave Weisselberg immunity for testimony last year, though that did not mean he flipped on Trump, as some surmised. The New York Times reported that the immunity grant, quote, was narrow in scope. We'll see. Then there's Trump himself, who directed the illegal payments. Why isn't he being charged? Well, you know why he's not being charged. Have prosecutors put it aside only because he's a sitting president and can't be indicted, or were there evidentiary concerns? To prove the violation, prosecutors would have to prove that Trump knew the payments were illegal. A tall order, I guess, when you can just plead moronic ignorance. Even though most people grow up with the belief that ignorance of the law is no excuse, it is for him. Because. Last week, CNN's report that the investigation would soon wrap up contained a curious tidbit. In January, prosecutors asked to interview Trump Organization executives on the topic, but per people familiar with the matter, prosecutors then never followed up on that request, and the interviews never took place. As Josh Marshall of Talking Points Memo points out, and you know you're reading Vox if it says that, because if it was the New York Times, they'd never tell you who it was. Bill Barr was confirmed as Attorney General in February, the month after that interview request. The following month, in March, Robert Khuzami, the prosecutor who oversaw the hush money probe, left government. Per the New York Times, he told colleagues his departure was unrelated to any political pressure, but now the investigation has fizzled out. To be clear, the investigation could be ending for perfectly normal reasons. In fact, there's no evidence right now of any untoward political interference, even from anonymous sources, which usually happens, I guess. Still, Barr's political behavior around the Mueller report has spurred some to raise questions about whether everything's above board here. Congress must make sure that Barr has done nothing to interfere with the case, Representative Adam Schiff tweeted Thursday. Whatever the case, though, it appears that yet another legal cloud over President Trump has been lifted. And I'm not really sure that it has, but apparently for some reason they're willing to say so. So he'll take that to the bank. Thanks a whole lot. And Congress also will not find out whether or not everything is above board because Bill Barr will simply refuse to appear before them and will answer no questions from them. And hands will be thrown up, shoulders will be shrugged, and the election will come and go. And what can I tell you? Register people to vote. That's your recourse. Ha ha. Anyway, so that's where we stand with that. Now, there was other speculation out there that I thought you might be interested in. And I have seen a few of you passing this around. I saw Empty Wheel passing this around. I saw Grudge passing this one around. Not Drudge, Grudging one passing this one around. And a few others of you as well. And I don't know why. I mean, I don't. But it sounds fun and interesting and is in a totally different and alternative theory of what the facts alleged in the search warrants illustrate. It was the surmise of the FBI, I think, that the communication between Cohen and Pecker and Trump and Hicks and the other person whose name I forget from the National Enquirer, that it was all about hush money payments to McDougal and or Stormy Daniels. But there's an alternative theory that I don't, off the top of my head, do I know for sure that it clicks? No. But others who, I don't know, are willing to type threads into Twitter say it does. So we have to, I don't know, we have to take that and run with it because reasons. I don't know. Empty Wheel thought it was of interest. Grudge thought it was of interest. Empty Wheel, of course, we all know, follows this stuff obsessively. And I don't know. Is it a hobby for Grudge? Who knows? Anyway, Soy Chica, Random Facts Girl on Twitter, has this claim, a thread which begins this way: my God, I think they had this all wrong. The timing on this whole thing directly parallels all the developments in, if I had a drum roll, I would roll it right now, in the Katie Johnson case. Oh, I guess we can use dramatic music for that. The Katie Johnson case. My goodness, the Katie Johnson case. Well, okay. For people who cover this stuff closely, they, of course, said, well, that's a worthy moment. But for me, I said, oh, the Katie Johnson case. What's that? So I had to read. Well, what are they talking about? Well, let's see. I guess the best way of putting it here is simply spill the beans. Katie Johnson is the name or pseudonym of the woman who at one point filed suit claiming that Donald Trump had raped her when she was a very young teenager, I believe 13 years of age. And so the supposition here is that the timing and activity all actually argue in her mind anyway that what was being covered up here was not the Stormy Daniels story, or at least not actually the Stormy Daniels story, but the Katie Johnson story. And it involves a little bit of belief in three-dimensional chess, I think, to entirely swallow the story, because I think that they're also alleging that part of the story is that they were they were in fact simultaneously running the Stormy Daniels cover-up, but that they were running the Stormy Daniels cover-up at that point in time, which was admittedly a little strange because the affair was 10 years old at that point. But then there was the somewhat plausible story that because the election was looming, that there had been some threat by Stormy Daniels to go public immediately before the election, though the story was 10 years old. But the other alternative theory was that they ginned up the story that Stormy Daniels was going to be opening her mouth here and spilling the beans so that they could start moving money around to try to kill both that and, under cover of that, kill the Katie Johnson story, and that they could, if necessary, feed the press, accidentally or otherwise, the story of the somewhat less embarrassing Stormy Daniels liaison, in hopes that the press would chase that down and not be sniffing around for information about the Katie Johnson case. So that's a pretty intriguing possibility. We are, of course, right up against our break here, and so we'll continue on the other side of the break with the tweet thread and maybe some information that will help fill in the blanks in case you don't really remember the details of the Katie Johnson case. And well, look, that's how we're going to have to handle it that way. And then perhaps into some Good Friday theorizing and discussion pieces so that you can have interesting and exciting discussions with friends, family, Romans, countrymen, whatever you have on your plate for the upcoming weekend. So we'll be right back and share this info with you after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, how shall we handle this? I believe at a relatively early point in the Twitter thread that I have threatened to read to you, but not so far read to you, from Soy Chica, there is reference to the Daily Mail and their stories about Katie Johnson, which may help provide some background. But let's at least get this first tweet of the thread out of the way, where our Soy Chica correspondent says, "My God, I think they had this all wrong. The timing in this whole thing," by which she means the FBI's laying out of a timeline for the purposes of justifying search warrants in the Michael Cohen case. That whole thing directly parallels all the developments in the Katie Johnson case. And we'll find out why that's of interest. Now, she includes a screen grab from the electronic versions of the newly released documents that begins this way. Cohen's 4 p.m. call with Davidson. Remember, that's the lawyer who represents Daniels. But also remember that that if I have it right, Davidson also represented, I don't know whether it was necessarily Katie McDougal or not, but has represented several women, and several women who were claiming affairs with Trump, but also several women who were mysteriously claiming relationships with Elliot Broidy and others in the immediate Trump circle. And no one really has ever adequately explained how it is that Donald Trump and Elliot Broidy and maybe some other people came to use the same lawyers for solving their blabbermouth mistress problems. I don't know. Is that maybe lays too much of the blame on the women and all this? But that's, I'm sure, how they thought of it, which is to say in horrible, horrible ways. So whatever. At any rate, that's always been a mystery, and it's always kind of been a mystery why other people also in the Trump orbit did equally dumb things like decide that their lawyers for their embarrassing problems that should otherwise normally end political careers would be handled for them by Donald Trump's lawyer and his worst lawyer at that, Michael Cohen. It's been a weird experience, I guess, the whole thing. Anyway, so Cohen's 4 p.m. call with Davidson and or Davidson's threats to cancel the, quote, settlement agreement appear to have touched off a flurry of communications between the settlement agreement and whether Clifford would go public, public, period. Specifically, and I here will remind you that Stormy Daniels is a stage name. I don't know if she ever performs on stage, per se, but that's what they call them. And her real name is Stephanie Clifford. So, references to Clifford. It's not the big red dog. It's the porn star Stormy Daniels. And we could debate the star part, but I think she's relatively famous as porn performers go. Okay. Anyway, so Cohen's 4 p.m. call with Davidson and or Davidson's threats to cancel the settlement agreement, whatever that may be, appear to have touched off a flurry of communications about the settlement agreement and whether Clifford would go public. Specifically, one, at 4:43 p.m., Howard, that's the other person from the Inquirer, sent Cohen a text message that stated, "I'm told they're going with Daily Mail. Are you aware?" 1 minute later, Cohen responded, "Call me." I guess that's the tip here, the Daily Mail thing. Based on my involvement, and this would be the FBI agent affiant here, the agent who is swearing out the warrant, based on my involvement in this investigation, I understand Howard's text to mean that he heard that Clifford was going to take her story of an extramarital affair with Trump to the Daily Mail, a tabloid newspaper. 2, at 4:45 p.m. Remember, the first text was 4:43, 2 minutes earlier. At 4:45 p.m., Howard called Cohen, and they spoke for over 2 minutes. Moments later, Davidson and Cohen spoke for about 2 minutes. So here I guess they have sort of basically pen register readouts that tell you who's calling who and for how long they stay on the phone, but they're not tapping the phones to get the content of the conversations. Okay, next up, at 5:03 p.m., Cohen attempted to call Trump, but the call only lasted 8 seconds. This was Cohen's first call after he spoke with Davidson. Number 4 here, at 5:25 p.m., Cohen texted Howard stating, "Well," 3 question marks. Well, we're waiting, right? That's the question here. At 6:44 p.m., Howard responded to Cohen's text, stating, quote, "Not taking my calls," unquote. Cohen responded 1 minute later, "You're kidding. Who are you trying to reach?" Howard responded 1 minute later, "The agent." An agent is in quotes here. "Based on my involvement in this, blah, 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 blah." That's the end of the screen grab. So that's basically it's the FBI agent saying, based on my involvement and all this, my understanding of what's going on, I think that there's a conversation going on about Stephanie Clifford / Stormy Daniels threatening to end their settlement agreement and take her story to the Daily Mail. Now, that, I guess, is the tip here for Soy Chica, random facts girl, who says, at about the same time, Katie Johnson was going to the Daily Mail. And there's really not much else out there. No other mention of the Daily Mail, no mention, I don't think, in the stories that I've seen so far, of threats by Stormy Daniels to go to the Daily Mail. I'm not certain that she is aware of the Daily Mail. She might be. She might be a big tabloid fan or spend a lot of time in the UK. I have no idea. Or just read it online, as we frequently do. So it's possible. But yeah, I think I see what she's getting at here. The Daily Mail was actively on another story that would be even more damaging, but on pretty much the same subject, but even more damaging to Trump. So the next tweet in the thread, I guess, lays that out. It just reads, "She went with the Daily Mail." And it includes a link to the Katie Johnson story in the Daily Mail. And I've got that story here. And I don't know how long it is. It looks like it's pretty lengthy, and although a lot of it is, comments after the story. But this is, you've surely heard this before, that it existed. But here's the story. Exclusive. Trump's 13-year-old rape victim, and they enclose that in scare quotes for some reason, dramatically drops her case. That you've certainly heard by now. Woman withdraws legal claim she was assaulted at Jeffrey Epstein sex party. That's why you've heard it. That's the context in which you've heard it and why it's been coming up so often again in the past few days. And you know how Daily Mail does their thing. They put the big inflammatory headline, and then they put a bunch of bullet points up there. And then I read the bullet points, and then I start reading the story, and then I say, everything you needed to know was in the bullet points. So maybe we'll just do the bullet points. Katie Johnson's shocking allegations first emerged in a lawsuit filed in California in April this year. That would have been 2016, of course. Second bullet point, she claimed she was lured to a sex party by pedophile, though there are people who argue with the term, by pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, where she was forced into rough role-play sex with presidential candidate. He wasn't then, but he was at the time they wrote this story. She said she was 13 when she met Trump after leaving home in Oklahoma in 1994 to try to pursue a modeling career in New York. That seems like a familiar story. On Wednesday, Johnson suddenly canceled a press conference at which she was set to reveal herself for the first time. She spoke to dailymail.com, and we have now learned that lawyers are pulling the case she filed against Trump and Epstein. She had no proof that her story is true, and Trump has denied her claims. Clinton supporters had seized on the story as a possible knockout blow. So, what do we make of it? As a story by itself, it was, we had learned in normal times that should be considered troubling because, Because the lack of evidence made it difficult for American newspapers and maybe even some British newspapers to run a story about something so inflammatory with confidence. Of course, in hindsight, they should have just said, to hell with it, because who cares? Because Donald Trump runs around saying things like he did just the other day, that Ilhan Omar loves Al-Qaeda, hates this country, hates Jews. And what did he do? The other one that he did the other day was, I heard she married her brother to illegally stay in this country. But I don't know anything about that. I mean, the oldest Trump play in the book. And we all, went on with our lives as though the president of the United States wasn't doing this nonsense. But there you have it. Okay, so I think the point here that Soy Chica is making here is that the timing, at the very least, the timing is, it turns out, according to her claims, the same. You could certainly be running both operations simultaneously, but that the Daily Mail really only rings the Katie Johnson bell, and there's no evidence anywhere else that I'm aware of that the Daily Mail was in play for Stormy Daniels. But okay, So she continues on then with her thread. They call Keith Davidson Keith elsewhere, not the agent, which is likely Lisa Bloom or Al Taylor, which I take to mean that Lisa Bloom or Al Taylor have at some point identified themselves as agents working on behalf of Katie Johnson. So Random Facts Girl Soy Chica here says, show me the phone number and I'll tell you which. I guess she knows them that well from her research. So it's interesting. So what she said, she's referring to the reference in the affidavit here that says Howard, the second guy from the Inquirer, is responding to Cohen's text saying, not taking my calls. Cohen's response a minute later, you're kidding, who are you trying to reach? And Howard says a minute later, the agent. Whereas in all their previous conversations, when they were talking about Davidson, they said, Keith, I'm trying to reach Keith, the agent, in quotes. I mean, that could be Keith. I guess the theory here is that the FBI agent either didn't know about the Katie Johnson case or was just fixated on, I guess, having been handed some clues that they were at the time trying to negotiate with Stormy Daniels, just figured this was the same operation. So the next tweet in the thread says, the thing that could look bad for everyone, an interview was set up with CNN. So here is another screen grab of another section of the newly unsealed documents. Item number 37 here, which begins on or about October 25th, 2016. The communications between Cohen, Davidson, and Howard and Pecker picked up again, apparently concerning a transaction involving Clifford. Pardon me, hold on just a moment. Wow, I was being interfered with by Russian frogs for just a moment. Okay, so it was October 25th. Communications now between Cohen, Davidson, Howard, and Pecker, apparently concerning a transaction involving Clifford, apparent only to this FBI agent. The claim is that it was involving someone else. Specifically, based on my review of toll records, information obtained pursuant to the Cohen email warrants and iCloud warrant, as well as my review of public sources, I, the FBI agent, have learned the following. A. On October 25th, 2016, at 6:09 p.m., Howard sent Cohen a text message stating, Keith, calling you urgently. We have to coordinate something on the matter he's calling you about, or it's, and gets the sick notation there, or it, he means it could look awfully bad for everyone. All right. 1 minute later, Davidson sent Cohen a text message stating, call me. Cohen and Davidson, and remember here, Keith calling you urgently, and they refer to him as Keith. So Howard tells Cohen that Keith is calling urgently. 1 minute later, Davidson, Keith, sent Cohen a text stating, call me. Cohen and Davidson called each other several times over the next half hour, but appear not to have connected. At 6:42 p.m., Cohen and Davidson spoke for about 8 minutes. At 7:11 p.m., they spoke for another 2 minutes. B. The next morning, on or about October 26th, 2016, at 8:26 a.m., Cohen called Trump and spoke to him for approximately 3 minutes. At 8:34 a.m., Cohen called Trump again and connected for a minute and a half. At approximately 9:04 a.m., less than 30 minutes after speaking with Trump, Cohen sent 2 emails to the person who had incorporated Resolution Consultants and Essential Consultants for him. So he has 2 consulting LLCs after all, and still made this huge mistake. And he called the person who did the incorporation for him and stated, can you send me ASAP the filing receipt? And then in the second call, something. The important information to Soy Chica here is in the portion I've already read you. It's in A, B, and possibly some beginning part of C. So what does she make of it? The thing that could look bad for everyone, an interview was set up with CNN. And I guess that comes from her knowledge of the Katie Johnson case. So that thing that could look bad, and they do refer to it rather cryptically in the call, right? Keith is calling you urgently. We have to coordinate something on the matter he's calling you about, or it could look awfully bad for everyone. So the theory is that what Keith wants to talk about is a CNN interview, I guess, with Katie Johnson, who still at this point is rolling forward with her suit. Next tweet begins with the information that November 4th, and I guess we're about to talk about activities on November 4th, but that November 4th was the day that Pizzagate started. I guess that they began insisting that the emails that they had stolen from John Podesta that referred to pizza was in fact code for pedophilic activity at Comet Pizza in the non-existent basement. So that was the day that the Pizzagate theory launched. But it was also apparently the day that Katie Johnson, quote, disappeared. And we'll see what she means here. She's got another screen grab from the released documents that reads, let's see. Okay, so there was, again, lead in from the FBI agent. Specifically, I have learned the following. A, between 4:30 and 8 p.m. on November 4th, Cohen communicated several times with Howard, Pecker, and Davidson. For instance, at approximately 4:49 p.m., Cohen sent Howard a text message with a screenshot of an email forwarded to him by another Trump Organization lawyer. And you might wonder what's the reason for going with a screenshot of an email that had been forwarded to him by another Trump Organization lawyer. And the answer could be, the guy's on his phone and not at his desk and can't open up the emails quite as easily as he can look at screenshots of them in texts. Or it could mean, I don't want any more forwarding on this thing. The original email should remain in as few hands as possible for operational security. But Cohen's not particularly good at that, so I don't know whether I credit him for it. Okay, so 4:49 p.m., Cohen sent Howard a text message with a screenshot of an email forwarded to him by another Trump Organization lawyer. The forwarded email was from a Wall Street Journal reporter and asked for comment from Trump and or the campaign on the story. Now remember that the FBI agent thinks that the only story that's going on here is the Stormy Daniels story, and that was Stormy Daniels was the story that Wall Street Journal was in fact running at the time. Cohen also spoke with Hicks several times, including shortly before and or after calls with Pecker, Howard, and Davidson. Indeed, at approximately 7:33 p.m., using two different cell phones subscribed to him, Cohen appears to have been talking to Davidson and Hicks at the same time. Now, part B here, at approximately 8:51 p.m., Cohen sent Howard a message stating she's being really difficult with giving Keith a statement. Basically went into hiding and unreachable. Now, was Stormy Daniels in hiding or unreachable? Not at any point, and with which I remember, but Katie Johnson was. 1 minute later, Howard responded, "I'll ask him again. We just need her to disappear." That's kind of ominous, all by itself. Cohen responded, "She definitely disappeared, but refuses to give a statement, and Keith cannot push her." And, I have to agree. I don't know whether maybe at that particular point in time, Stormy Daniels was being reticent about things and had fallen into silence, but that's not my recollection. But as Soy Chica notes, November 4th was the day that Pizzagate rumors started, and it was the date that Katie Johnson, I guess, disappeared from public view. She then goes on to say, as a note on the next section of the newly released documents, she says, "I mean FFS," which you probably know as to mean for F's sake. There were exactly six stories written about it. Why is that of interest? Well, it's in this next screen grab. At approximately 9:03, Hicks called Cohen, and they spoke for 2 minutes. At approximately 9:11 p.m., Cohen called Howard and spoke to him for 5 minutes. At approximately 9:15 p.m., Hicks called Cohen, and they spoke for nearly 7 minutes. Again, Cohen used different phones for these two calls, such that he appears to have been on both calls for about a minute of overlap. At approximately 9:32 p.m., Cohen texted Pecker, "The boss just tried calling you. Are you free?" A minute later, Cohen texted Howard, "Is there a way to find David quickly?" And then another item here, I guess this is item E. The last one was D, so maybe that's a continuation of the A and B we had read before. At approximately 9:50 p.m., the Wall Street Journal article was published online. Howard and Hicks both sent web links for the article to Cohen. Over the next half hour, Cohen and Howard exchanged several text messages commenting on how the story came across. The next morning, on November 5th, 2016, at approximately 7:35 a.m., Cohen texted Hicks, quote, "So far, I see only 6 stories, getting little to no traction." Hicks responded, "Same, keep praying, 2 exclamation points. It's working, 1 exclamation point. Cohen wrote back, "Even CNN not talking about it. No one believes it, and if necessary, I have a," and then it cuts off there. So I'd be curious about what he has, and we could look that up and read the text for ourselves, but here's what we've got in front of us. So, remember what they just said. Okay, I'm only seeing 6 stories, getting little to no traction. Well, there were an awful lot of Stormy Daniels stories, to be sure. And more than 6, I would think. Now, next included here is a screen grab of a Google search, perhaps, looking for, and I guess she limited the story or the search range from July 1st, 2015 through December 1st, 2016. If I'm reading this this labeling up at the top of the screen grab correctly. And I don't know whether she cropped this picture or not, but the idea here is it's being offered to illustrate the following, that the Stormy Daniels story got widespread coverage, but one story that on November 5th, I guess, I mean, it's hard to tell whether this Google search replicates conditions on November 5th at 7:35 a.m., but they specifically say there's only 6 stories. It's getting little or no traction. This is, in fact, a lineup through Google News search of exactly 6 stories making mention of Katie Johnson and her lawsuit. Why did Katie Johnson drop her sexual assault claim against Donald Trump? Lawsuit charges Donald Trump with raping a 13-year-old girl. It was a Snopes reference. Vox had something. The lawsuit accusing Trump of raping a 13-year-old girl explained. Woman suing over alleged teen rape drops suit again in Politico. A Daily Mail story, the one we were referring to. And Donald Trump rejects categorically false charges of raping teenage girl, calls tale a bogus political, cheap, and I imagine it goes on from there, cheap shot, in the New York Daily News. Although I would say this requires a little bit more investigation to figure out whether there were in fact more stories and why this mix of stories about the suit being dropped and some just being an explainer of the case existing in the first place. That is a little, I don't know if that makes as much sense, right? Like, you're really talking about if the story, and particularly if the story on November 4th was that the case was being dropped, how many stories do you want to see about the case being dropped? And of course, I'm sure that they wanted to see as few stories mentioning the case as possible, and they were glad it wasn't getting much traction. But after all, if the case is being dropped, I don't know. It's a little bit difficult to understand why they're so, worried about it. Unless, of course, and I think what she's trying to hint at here is that the whole operation that the FBI is actually watching here is a payoff to Katie Johnson or someone else in exchange for getting that case dropped and a story being published proclaiming that case to have been dropped. So, going on here with the last couple tweets from Soy Chica. So she says, this is as far as I've gotten, but the timeline of communications is tight with the developments in the Katie Johnson story, including some other things that are not public knowledge at this time, which I guess we're not going to find out about from her at this point. I'll add more later, and we'll see if she does. But for now, if you think I'm a nutter for wondering, here are some questions. Why make large payments in excess of the $10,000 BSA reporting threshold? I don't know. Why make it so easy to find out where the money came from and went? I don't know why she asks those questions particularly, but okay. Unless you want to make it easy for investigators to find the transactions, it doesn't make sense. I see what she's talking about here. I've got more work to do here, but here's the deal. I don't know what's going on with these filings, and if the special agent was unaware of the Katie Johnson case, but just given the timing of everything, if I were writing this book, whichever it may be, Stormy Daniels would have been little more than cover, I guess, the book, the novel, which is Donald Trump's amazing rise to the presidency despite being a despicable scumbag. If I were writing that book, Stormy Daniels would have been little more than cover in case anyone started poking around for attempts to silence the Katie Johnson story. And I'd check those signal logs for November 2nd to November 4th for sure, because there's some reports that all of these guys were likewise communicating via Signal, the secret messaging app. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and let's wrap things up here with the Soy Chica thread here. She's just basically, though, then she's theorizing that why did they handle the Stormy Daniels payments in ways that were too obvious? There are so many ways and so many other things they could have done to have made it at least somewhat more difficult to find out what was going on here. I guess her theory is that the reason they moved chunks of money far in excess of the amounts that will trigger bank warnings, that is $10,000, and the reason for parking it in Essential Consultants LLC, when we now, of course, find out that he has more LLCs, and of course, Alan Weisselberg and everybody else working at the Trump organization knows very well how to isolate and limit liability and potential damage by opening up an infinite number of LLCs. But that somehow Michael Cohen didn't and all this. Now, he was a terrible lawyer, to be sure, but it's really almost impossible to understand why somebody would establish limited liability companies and then purposefully use them in ways that don't limit their liability. But I guess the theory here is they made a very splashy, obvious, and easy to track show of paying Stormy Daniels so that, I guess in the hopes that investigators and reporters alike would say, aha, how stupid of them, we've found the smoking gun, and run with that story rather than say, is something else going on here? Maybe nothing else was going on, but the theory is that they made a very obvious display of mistakenly breaking about 8 cardinal rules of hiding money and moving it to make payoffs, and then said, oh my goodness, you got us. He had sex with Stormy Daniels. And everybody focused on that, including the FBI. So that's the story that she's proposing here. And she says, check those signal logs for the same time period and see if they tell you a different story or give you supplemental information. And I did see Empty Wheel saying it is a known fact, I guess, that those 4 were communicating over Signal as well. at that point. And again, text messages, which are easy to see as they pass by, especially if you know that the FBI is watching, that can be about Stormy Daniels or allegedly about Stormy Daniels, and secret communications happening elsewhere. Anyway, she says, by way of conclusion, then again, who am I to guess? I'm just somebody who designed a system that's used to track bank fraud and financial crimes across jurisdictions, and who helped put one serial predator in politics in prison. I could be wrong, but it's worth a look. People who know her better probably know off the bat. Who is that other person that she helped put in prison? I don't know, but maybe you do. But it's not necessary to know offhand to see that there might be something to this. Lots of responses to her here, and interesting discussion about what happened to Katie Johnson and why her video testimony has been pulled from various sources, though it's been mirrored elsewhere. And let's see, just kind of interesting, to say the very least. I'm curious about whether or not there's any more currently from Soy Chica. And I'll just check the Twitter feed to see what else is going on. Let's see, last night I guess she tailed off by tweeting around the Vanity Fair article, Decoding Jeffrey Epstein's Mysterious Star-Studded Black Book. But to what end, I do not know. Let's see. Is there more information that she's been passing around from her analysis of what was released yesterday? Yeah, I don't think so. I think that kind of finishes it out. So, okay. Just wanted to sort of make you aware of that the cutting edge, at the bleeding edge of theorizing about what's really going on here and trying to dissect the information released yesterday. At that bleeding edge, there are theorists who believe that what it really evidences is how, for whatever reason, how careless the players are in a game that they've played successfully many times, but are then nonetheless careless this 15th time with information that would lead to a, blockbuster story about Stormy Daniels, which would almost certainly satisfy investigators and investigative reporters that they've hooked a big one, and that they wouldn't then go on to look at the better hidden clues about the possibility that a payment was either made to Katie Johnson or to someone else to, let's say, threaten Katie Johnson to the extent that she would drop the case and move to another country and just say, instead, I think I'll just try and move on with my life. Although, that's an understandable conclusion too. Okay, so I thought I would bring you up to date on that one. And what else do we want to pursue here? How about, here's an interesting piece that's not breaking news stuff, but, it's Friday and we can try and explore some of these things and give you conversation material as well. This from Mother Jones. Ali Brayland writes this piece, which is it's a good question. Why are right-wing conspiracies so obsessed with pedophilia? That's a good question. We've always answered it to this point with the answer of projection. Let's see whether there's anything more to it, according to Ali Breland here. The story is the same, from daycare panics to QAnon. It's not really about the kids, it's about fears of a changing social order. I'm curious now. Let's find out. The children, what a great beginning for a Friday morning. Are you still having breakfast? The children were being sodomized in secret underground tunnels, the story begins. As it turns out, hopefully, they are not. I was going to say it was fantasy, but that implies something far worse. Although maybe with these alt-right types, that may be true. Okay, so that's how it starts off. Their captors drank blood in front of them and staged satanic ritual sacrifices. It does sound rather ridiculous, doesn't it? Sometimes the kids were filmed for pornographic purposes. In total, several hundred children were subjected to this treatment, and it all happened in the middle of a safe neighborhood where crimes were not supposed to happen, let alone such unspeakable and horrific ones. Not that anyone else witnessed the abuse, nor was there any clear evidence that it was actually happening, but people were sure it was real. It made too much sense, they all agreed. Everything fell into place, one of them said, and I guess you could say the same about Soichika, I suppose, but okay. Hundreds, maybe thousands of otherwise normal, relatively well-adjusted Americans truly believed, I don't know how well-adjusted they were, truly believed that a massive ring of occultist pedophiles, to make it just a little bit worse, was operating right under everyone's noses. The McMartin preschool scandal of the 1980s was a sort of analog version of the more recent Pizzagate, part of a lurid and misbegotten moral panic about subterranean child abuse. Even though the supposed crimes unfolded thousands of miles and several decades apart under very different circumstances, the two conspiracy theories share the same rough contours. The McMartin saga, which began in 1983 with accusations made by one boy's mother, came to encompass fantastical claims about a massive pedophile ring lurking beneath a preschool in Manhattan Beach, California. Pizzagate was concocted during the 2016 presidential campaign and alleged that prominent figures in the Democratic Party were running a child sex ring in tunnels beneath the Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria in residential Washington, D.C. Both spun off into new theories. Amid a full-on national hysteria, McMartin spawned a series of daycare conspiracies, while Pizzagate has led to QAnon, an even wilder conspiracy theory that postulates that President Donald Trump is on the verge of arresting a throng of liberal elites for facilitating and participating in a sprawling child sex ring. By the way, one of the more infuriating outcomes that could actually happen in all of this is that Donald Trump does, in fact, arrest a throng of liberal elites for political purposes because he's an authoritarian and emerging fascist, charging them perhaps with any number of crimes, but not participating in a sprawling child sex ring. And QAnon won't need any prodding at all to come to the conclusion that they're just, for some reason, hiding the ball on all this. But here are the promised arrests after all. That'll just be so frustrating and annoying, won't it? Both drew on natural fears about child safety and supercharged them into national phenomena with real-world ramifications. Both, of course, were fictions. Conspiracies centering on the vulnerability of children are neither new nor distinctly American. Wild claims of Jews killing Christian children and using their blood in rituals, the blood libel, date back to at least the 12th century and have popped up every so often since then. And long before that, Christians were suspected of performing similar rites. And by the way, I'm curious about whether the blood libel dates back to the Peasants' Crusade that we were discussing the other day. Convenient timing. I think it might. I think that was 11th century, so we might have 100 years passing in between the two. But you know how it is with medieval history. Everything runs together. But it would make for a convenient excuse. Why are we robbing and or killing all of these Jewish people for their food when we could be obtaining it elsewhere or be equal opportunity murderers? I hate Jews, but if that's not enough for you, blood libel story. Maybe that will convince you. Ah, yes, that works. I'm hungry and I hate them now. Thank you for reassuring me. All right. Anyway, the article continues. Hurting children is one of the worst things you can say someone is doing. It's an easy way to demonize your enemy, says Catherine Olmsted, a professor of history at the University of California at Davis, who has studied conspiracy theories. Why do child abuse conspiracies explode into public consciousness at certain moments? Explanations offered for their peculiar resonance of Pizzagate and QAnon tend to focus on pathologies in the media ecosystem. Epistemic bubbles, polarization, the unruly growth of social media. But years before the fracturing of mass culture and the dawn of Reddit and 4chan, the McMartin accusations fed a national spectacle during which scores of people were wrongly accused of sex crimes against children. The continuities between the McMartin case and Pizzagate suggest a broader explanation for pedophile conspiracies. They aren't the residue of malfunctions in our media culture. They're an outgrowth of the normal workings of reactionary politics. That is a possibility. Author Richard Beck, in We Believe the Children, A Moral Panic in the 1980s, locates the roots of the McMartin conspiracy theory in the social progress of the previous decade, particularly in the gains won by women. In the 80s, you had a strong, vicious anti-feminist backlash that would be chiefly led, I think, by Rush Limbaugh, whose work spans decades and has been critiqued in distinct sections, most recently, of course, by our own Ian Reifowitz. But he was a liar about such things and calling people feminazis back in the previous era as well. In the 80s, you had this strong, vicious anti-feminist backlash that helped conspiracies take hold, Beck tells me. In the 70s, middle and upper class women had started to enter the full-time workforce instead of being homemakers. This was the dawn of what economist Claudia Golden has termed the quiet revolution. Thanks in part to expanding reproductive freedom, career horizons had widened sufficiently by the end of the 1970s for women to become, in Golden's words, active participants who bargain somewhat effectively in the household and the labor market. It's a strong statement there, Claudia. Don't get carried away with yourself, but okay. They were now forming their identities outside the context of the family and household. The patriarchal family was under siege, as conservatives saw it, and daycare centers had become the physical representation of the social forces bedeviling them. You had this Reagan-driven conservative resurgence, Beck says, and daycare was seen as at least suspicious, if not an actively maligned force of feminism. They kept that one relatively to themselves at the time, I guess. Daycare held a prominent place in right-wing demonology. I didn't know that. As far back as the 1960s, conservatives were warning darkly that childcare, quote, was a communist plot to destroy the traditional family. Well, we're right back to accusing people of being commies now, aren't we? This, as sociologist Jill Quadagno, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, writes in The Color of Welfare. In 1971, President Richard Nixon vetoed the Comprehensive Child Development Act, which would have established a national daycare system. In his veto message, Nixon used the red-baiting language urged upon him by his special assistant, Pat Buchanan, saying the program would have committed, quote, the vast moral authority of the national government to the side of communal approaches to child rearing against the family-centered approach. Oh my God, it might take a village. In a decade of rising divorce rates, at least conspiracism and reactionary social conservatism could enjoy a happy marriage. By the time Judy Johnson came forward in 1983 with allegations that a teacher at the McMartin preschool had molested her child, the country had been primed to assume the worst by more than a decade of child care fear-mongering. Certainly, it wasn't just the movement of women into the workplace that created the conditions for a reactionary panic. There were other cultural forces at work. The anti-rape campaign of the 1970s, historian Philip Jenkins writes in Moral Panic, had formulated the concepts and vocabulary that would become integral to child protection ideology. In particular, a refusal to disbelieve victims. The repressed memory movement of that era had created a therapeutic consensus surrounding kids' claims of molestation. Be willing to believe the unbelievable, as the self-help book The Courage to Heal put it. Believe the survivor. No one fantasizes abuse. And the anti-cult movement of the late 1970s had raised the specter of satanic cabals engaging in human sacrifice and other sinister behavior. Beck likens conspiracy theories to parables. The ones that stick are those that most effectively validate a group's anxieties, with blame assigned to outsiders. In a 2017 paper on Pizzagate and pedophile conspiracies, psychology professor Jim Klein, now at Northern Marianas College, argues that conspiracy theories are born during times of turmoil and uncertainty. In an interview, Klein goes further. Social turmoil can overwhelm critical thinking. It makes us get beyond what is logically possible. We go into this state of hysteria, and we let that overwhelm ourselves. Yes, overwhelm ourselves. Okay. The McMartin accusations were a vivid demonstration of the rot in the American social structure as perceived by conservatives. Perhaps inevitably, the claims metastasized. Now it was hundreds of children who had been assaulted or subjected to satanic rituals. And now, instead of just one McMartin teacher, there was an entire sex ring involved. One boy told of adults in masks and black robes, dancing and moaning, of live rabbits chopped to bits by candlelight. California's Nightmare Nursery, People magazine called it. But soon, the case began to fall apart. The stories of abuse turned out to have been coaxed out of children by way of dubious and leading questioning. Judy Johnson, who made the initial accusations that her son had been molested, was found to be a paranoid schizophrenic. In 1986, a district attorney dropped charges. At one point, there had been 208 counts in all, against all but two of the original defendants. A pair of trials ended in 1990 with the juries deadlocking on some charges and acquitting on the others. After 7 years and $15 million in prosecution costs, the remaining charges were dropped. However flimsy its premises, the case whipped up a national panic. In 1985, a teacher's aide in Massachusetts was wrongly convicted of molesting 3-, 4-, and 5-year-old boys and girls. The prosecutor had told the jury that a gay man working in a daycare was like a chocoholic in a candy store. Wow. Around that time, employees at a Bronx daycare center, at several centers, were arrested for allegedly sexually abusing children. 5 men were sentenced before all ultimately saw their convictions overturned. Liberals certainly participated in the hysteria. Well, everyone wants to protect children, right? Gloria Steinem donated money to the McMartin investigation, but by and large it was a reactionary phenomenon. What drove the panic, Beck says, wasn't just the sense that children were being harmed, it's that families were being harmed. In 2016, 3 decades after the McMartin trial, WikiLeaks, in cahoots with Russian hackers, maybe, published the private emails of top Hillary Clinton advisor John Podesta. In one, Podesta is invited to a fundraiser at Comet Ping Pong. Amateur internet sleuths blew it up into a conspiracy theory about a child sex ring. Oh, that's the the missing link here, isn't it? I mean, if, at least in the McMartin case, you had someone claiming to have been sexually abused. Whereas here it was just, hey, do you want to get some pizza? Oh, but pizza secretly means pedophilia. I'm not sure where does that arise from. And I don't know if this explains it. Okay, well, let's see. Podesta's invited to a fundraiser at Comet Ping Pong. Amateur internet sleuths blew it up into a conspiracy theory about a child sex ring. The pedophiles communicated in code. Hot dog meant young boy. Cheese meant little girl. Sauce meant orgy. Why? The theory was easily debunked because it didn't make any goddamn sense whatsoever. Eventually, it was abandoned by the high-profile internet figures who'd initially given it oxygen, but not before Pizzagate, as it was immediately dubbed, had spilled over into reality. In December of 2016, a 28-year-old man named Edgar Madison Welch, having driven from North Carolina to Washington, D.C., fired an assault rifle inside Comet in a bid to rescue the children he thought were locked away there. No one was hurt. Also, no one was freed. Of course, Welch was sentenced to 4 years in prison. The QAnon conspiracy picked up where Pizzagate left off, alleging that the liberal elite's pedophile ring extends way beyond one restaurant, and it is only a matter of time before Trump arrests Podesta, Clinton, and other Democratic power brokers for their crimes. All of this was fueled by an anonymous internet poster dubbed Q, who claims to be a government insider. With Pizzagate and QAnon, the molesters have changed from daycare workers to the liberal elite, and the politics behind the theories now are more explicitly spelled out. But certainly not explicably, but explicitly. But the general context is more or less the same. Conservative retrenchment after a period of progressive social gains. If women's entry into the workplace in the latter half of the 20th century triggered deep anxieties about the decay of the traditional gender roles in the family unit, the 21st century version here was same-sex marriage, growing acceptance of transgender rights, and the seeming cultural hegemony of a social justice agenda. Q found that fear, says Travis View, a conspiracy theory researcher and host of the QAnon Anonymous podcast. I hope that doesn't mean he's a former QAnon person. While Q directly never touches on trans rights or those sorts of things, there is a great deal of anxiety on those sorts of issues, he says, referring to the QAnon community at large. They're concerned generally on the sort of acceptance of trans people and the over-sexualization of children. On the matter of transgender rights, the conspiracists are aligned with, quote, normal, unquote, conservative politics. From the state legislatures to the White House, Republicans have made considerable hay out of attacking and overturning various protections that have been extended to trans people. Conspiracy theories of all kinds draw their energy from social anxieties. Occasionally, there is some real basis for the theories. In her book, Republic of Lies, American Conspiracy Theorists and Their Surprising Rise to Power, Anna Merlan details the belief among black New Orleans, like New Orleans people, New Orleanians, I guess. Whew. It's not that easy if you've never said it. That after Hurricane Katrina, the city's levees hadn't failed on their own. They had been bombed intentionally to destroy the poor parts of New Orleans. The theory was rooted in a real event, a 1927 decision to dynamite levees outside of New Orleans, the logic there being that they were going to flood the low-lying areas and save the city itself, Merlan said in an interview with Mother Jones's Becca Andrews. It created a lingering sense of suspicion that maybe the government could do this again, or rather would. View, the researcher mentioned before, points out that the concern about elites preying on children isn't baseless either. The core elements of the systematic elite child abuse theories, they aren't crazy, he says. There are instances of wealthy, powerful, abusing children and other people covering it up. Jeffrey Epstein, right? Catholic Church, yes. People have the sense that elites can commit horrifying crimes and get away with them. The Epstein arrest earlier this month has done much to ratify the QAnon worldview. This is just the beginning, declared QAnoner Liz Crokin, a former gossip columnist. The storm is officially here. And, they do keep saying that Bill Clinton is a friend of Epstein's, and certainly if it were to reach him or he were to be questioned even, much less arrested, they would have just assumed that that was the QAnon theory come to fruition. The story continues here. Thus does the legitimate concern about elite predation and impunity get woven into a demeaning and dangerous social crusade. The storm, cited by Crokin, also known as the Great Awakening, is part of the vivid eschatology that QAnon adherents share with traditional conservative culture warriors, one in which judgment is at last rendered against liberals, and the nuclear family is restored to its proper place. One thing they often talk about after the storm is that they imagine that the economy will be restored so that a single income can support a family again, View says. They imagine traditional gender roles and norms will be upheld, and how children are raised will return to what it used to be, whatever that means. The differences between the pedophile conspiracies of the 1980s and those of today are telling in their own way. There's the matter of scale. The pedophile witch hunt of the 1980s managed to mobilize entire institutions, with much of the media uncritically amplifying its falsehoods and police taking action based on shoddy non-evidence. Lives were ruined around the country. But except for some reckless far-right pundits and websites, the media hasn't taken the claims of Pizzagate and QAnon seriously. Earnest conversations about the conspiracies are limited to online image boards and social media, and I guess we can all be thankful for that. Okay. Is there much more to this? It does go on for some time, though we are nearing the end, but we're going to have to take our break. Maybe we can squeeze in another paragraph or two. There's also the nature of the targets, which is different, where the pedophile conspiracies of the 80s attacked the institutional emblems of feminist progress. The pedophile conspiracies of the 2010s attacked the cultural emblems of creeping cosmopolitanism. That's a word that's come up in a couple other contexts in the last day or so, too. Rings a bell. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. Except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on it. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Shall we conclude? I think we've got the gist of this thing, but we might as well conclude with the Mother Jones article here. We've noted the other change in the conspiracy theory nature. This would be the kind of targets rather than feminist progress. The conspiracies of today attack, as they say, the cultural emblems of creeping cosmopolitanism. And that does come up quite a lot. And who was it that was just in the Twitter-focused news that I think I can look it up and see if I can find reference to it. But one of the Republican senators, apparently in covering for Trump's latest boorish and unacceptable behavior and racist comments, says, lays the blame on cosmopolitans, like, what did they say, 12 times in a Twitter rant. And of course, others have pointed out that cosmopolitan references in the past have variously described any number of traditionally liberal-leaning groups, including, once again, the poor Jews, who seem to get it from every direction. So that's a traditional conspiracy theory terminology that's occasionally used. And of course, it may actually, just legitimately be pointing at cosmopolitan in the literal sense, not as a metaphor for anyone else, given how focused Republican politicians and operatives are on shifting the balance of political power away from city centers to non-voting land out in the rural parts of the country, with varying results that bring us to the brink of disaster politically here in this country. Anyway, back to the article here. So today the abuse happens in businesses in cosmopolitan cities. Comet Ping Pong in the Chevy Chase neighborhood of D.C. Is Chevy Chase actually a neighborhood of D.C.? I thought it was a neighborhood in suburban Maryland, and that Comet Ping Pong wasn't. I don't know. I'm not certain where Comet Ping Pong is, but I do know this. They bought the sign from Comet Liquors, which used to be in the Adams Morgan section of D.C., but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, Comet Ping Pong is known as a welcoming space that regularly showcases progressive DIY artists and musicians. A tangible emblem, in the words of University of New Haven sociology professor Jeffrey S. Davies Carl, another name I'll have difficulty with, of inclusivity, tolerance, and other progressive values that are threatening to the conspiracy-prone alt-right. I think that there are better targets for it than that, but whatever. British historian Norman Cohn, in his book Europe's Inner Demons, finds elements of pedophile conspiracies throughout history. in the 1st century BC. That is going back a ways. Members of the Catalan conspiracy, I guess, Catalan conspiracy, an aristocratic plot to overthrow the Roman Republic, supposedly swore an oath over the entrails of a boy and then ate them. I could think of better ways to get together over a plot, but okay. And in the witch hunts of the 15th and through 17th centuries, tens of thousands of people were tortured and killed over allegations that they'd performed ritual child murder, among other heinous acts. The conspiracy theories documented by Cohn are fundamentally political. The rituals they describe are the means by which a group of conspirators affirms its solidarity, he writes, with the ultimate goal of overthrowing an existing ruler or regime and to seize power. The mass witch hunts that followed are political too, based on the demonological obsessions of the intelligentsia. The history of American political reaction is full of sex demons. Jim Crow was buttressed by myths about black male virility. Likewise, North Carolina's infamous bathroom bill was sold in part on the fear that predatory men could say they're transgender to gain access to women's bathrooms. Opponents of abortion rights continue to conjure gory fantasies of promiscuous women committing infanticide, an incitement that Trump turned into an applause line in an April rally. In this way, pedophile conspiracies act as a sort of propaganda of the counter-revolution, a funhouse reflection of the real threats to the social order. This is what connects QAnon and Pizzagate to McMartin, to the witch hunts of the Middle Ages, to the dawn of our major religions. The demons may take different forms, but the conspiracy is basically the same. Our house is under attack. Hey, that's gun rights stuff too. Decay of morals grows from day to day, goes one despairing account. A secret cabal is wreaking havoc across the land, the man complains to his friend. Its members recognize one another by secret signs and marks, and everywhere they introduce a kind of religion of lust that subverts ordinary fornication. There's a rumor that they worship the private parts of their director and high priest. Maybe the rumor is false, but such suspicions naturally attach to their secret and nocturnal rites. In this dialogue, written by Marcus Minucius Felix in the 2nd century, the Roman pagan Caecilius Natalis, speaks of Christians, interestingly, the way Pizzagators describe John Podesta and his fellow liberal elites. Natalis is particularly incensed by the cult's initiation ritual. The details are as revolting as they are notorious. New members are initiated into the cult, he reports, by stabbing and killing an infant who has been coated in dough. Sure, why not? But it is somewhat comforting to note that at one point the Christians who later insisted that this was the practice of Jews that they didn't like were once accused of the same thing by pagan Romans. I don't know how it's comforting. It's not at all. It makes no sense. But it's interesting to note that I guess I don't know what goes around comes around. That's no help to anybody. Okay. Very interesting, and an interesting theory and an interesting thought, and I still think that there's an awful lot of projection, and they're not mutually exclusive, but an interesting theory to introduce and something to discuss over the weekend. What else can we note in our last segment here? I want to take at least some note of a piece from Think Progress, Joshua Eaton reporting this one, and we'll keep it brief on this one unless it becomes amazingly absorbing. Catholics in Iowa went to church. That's not surprising. Steve Bannon, surprising we're even talking about him, tracked their phones. Yet another intrusion of modern technology into our lives and our politics. A very interesting thought here. Campaigns have been using cell phone location data for years. Did Bannon take it too far? Joshua Eaton asks. Steve Bannon and the conservative group Catholic Vote used cell phone location data for people who had been inside Roman Catholic churches in Dubuque, Iowa in 2018 to target them with Get Out the Vote ads, Think Progress has learned. Bannon, a former senior White House aide, made the claim in a deleted scene from the new documentary about him, which there should not be one, The Brink. This scene has not been previously published. If your phone's ever been in a Catholic church, it's amazing. They got this data, Bannon told director Allison Clayman as they sat in his Washington, D.C. home on the eve of the 2018 midterm elections. Is Allison Clayman, it's spelled the same way. Is she related to Larry Clayman from Judicial Watch? Is this a good documentary or a bad one? Is she a good witch or a bad witch? Literally, they can tell who's been in a Catholic church and how frequently, Bannon added, and they got it. It says triaged. I'm not certain if that's the word he means here. Bannon did not respond to multiple phone calls, text messages seeking comment. In response to a list of detailed questions from Think Progress, Catholic Votes Office manager Kathleen Storin said that the kind of data collection the group used does not allow you to collect personal information. So that sounds like a confirmation here. So very interesting. Catholic Vote would not say more about how the group collected its data that it used in 2018. The technology Bannon was alluding to is called geofencing, or ring fencing. It's become popular over the last several years with advertisers, campaigns, and advocacy groups that want to find people who may be receptive to their message. When Clayman asked Bannon on camera where he got his data from, he answered simply, the phone companies, and the data guys sell it, Bannon added. The data used in geofencing is anonymized, but privacy advocates have been sounding the alarm, saying that geofencing and other ways that companies collect and sell cell phone location data have the potential to reveal personal information about individual phone users. Some critics say geofencing churches in particular takes the technology too far. This is terribly disturbing. This is like a total infringement on everybody, said Sister Gwen Hennessy, a Franciscan sister and longtime social justice activist in Dubuque. I have not used it to target religious groups specifically, and I will say that for me, morally, that seems like going a step too far, said one executive at an advertising firm that regularly uses geofencing, who asked not to be named, but it doesn't surprise me. Well, entirely possible and quite disturbing, I'm sure, although for some reason we're not that disturbed with, let's say, collecting data on who's been to Dairy Queen. But okay, there's a quantum difference, I think, between Dairy Queen and visiting churches. Anyway, just wanted you to be aware that that story existed, and we'll see whether that one crops up at some later date. Let's see, there's some moderate Democrat poking we could do. Of some interest here, the New York Magazine piece from Eric Levitz, who is usually worth reading. Let me see about how long this one will take to get through, or whether we, I think it's just a short blurb, perhaps. But I like the headline. Moderate Democrats warn that AOC is distracting from their non-existent message. It's an interesting thing to think about here. Moderate Democrats. Oh, I've reached my monthly article limit. Maybe that's my problem here. Is that why I can't tell how long this thing is? Moderate Democrats are sick and tired of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her squad dominating the headlines. Thus, to ensure that those four progressive congresswomen do not garner any additional media attention, several House moderates decided to complain about them anonymously in interviews with CNN on Wednesday. Those would be the tweets, I guess, sent out by Jake Tapper. This airtight plan appears to have backfired. I'm only half kidding. Obviously, moderate Democrats intended CNN to broadcast their concerns to the world, but it is difficult to reconcile lawmakers' complaints with their apparent strategy for resolving them. We read most of the tweets from Jake Tapper yesterday, and so just as a reminder, it's the anonymous Democrats saying, gosh, we're getting tired of having to defend the squad all the time, and they're never there for us. If your goal is to galvanize media attention around bread and butter issues, whining to Jake Tapper seems like a less effective tactic than, say, taking interesting stances on bread and butter issues. And yet, as Vox's Matt Iglesias notes, it has been House moderates, not Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, or AOC, who have prevented House Democrats from advancing several of their most compelling messaging bills. Nancy Pelosi's caucus finally did pass the $15 minimum wage bill on Thursday, but Pelosi had to promise to pass that popular policy with 100 hours within 100 hours, or she had promised to pass it within 100 hours of assuming the speakership. Instead, it has taken 7 months for her to grind down moderate opposition. Meanwhile, centrist Democrats have blocked their party from passing a bill that would allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices, a measure that would effectively transfer large sums of money out of Big Pharma's profit margins and into seniors' pockets. This is a winning issue in every district in the country, at least if you value the approval of voters more than lobbyists. A recent Kaiser Family Foundation poll found that 86% of Americans approve of Medicare negotiating lower drug prices. There's a reason that Donald Trump pretended to support such a policy throughout the bulk of his presidential campaign and is now desperately searching for more industry-friendly means of pushing down the cost of pharmaceuticals. The GOP cannot compete at the national level without winning an outsized share of older voters, and older voters cannot stomach the rising costs of their pills. This gives Democrats a golden opportunity to expand their coalition by gaining the upper hand on a high salience issue. As the party that's less allergic to price controls, they're well positioned to give a right-leaning constituency something it desperately wants but cannot get from the GOP, but moderate Democrats aren't letting them. Although maybe it's wise, I should say, to say, are those, I don't know. I mean, I guess if they're persuadables, they're persuadables. But then there's also the lesson of stop going after Trump voters. And I suppose if they are, in fact, diehard Trump voters, it might be a waste of time. But I doubt very much that moderate Democrats are trying to save us from that fate. The idea that Trump benefits from drawing national attention to his overt racism is dubious, as Greg has reminded us. But it is probably true that all else equal, the GOP would rather be defending Trump's attacks on Ilhan Omar than his administration's shadow war on the 99%. If moderate Democrats are worried that their party is focused on issues Trump loves to talk about, they could confront the president on the ones he never acknowledges. The president may proudly broadcast his indifference to climate change, but he always pretended to support clean air and water, and he keeps making claims about them, of course. And yet, since taking office, the Trump administration has, among other things, restored Dow Chemicals' freedom to sell an insecticide that scientists say causes neural damage in small children, but who cares about them, defended the liberty of Texas coal plants to spew deadly amounts of sulfur dioxide into the skies above Houston's suburbs, and fought for the God-given right of coal plants to dump mining waste in streams. Now, Trump's EPA is preparing new rules that would prohibit ordinary U.S. citizens or community groups from appealing the issuance of pollution permits to nearby power plants or factories, while preserving the right of polluters to appeal the denial of such permits. Which is to say, the administration wants to give corporations more say over environmental policy than ordinary Americans, not just in practice, but in law. On some issues, it may be pragmatic for swing district Democrats to avoid leveling populist critiques against the Trump administration. Moderates like Josh Gottheimer, who represents Republican-leaning affluent constituencies, have cause for opposing tax increases on the upper middle class. But the available evidence suggests that a majority of voters across zip codes and tax brackets actually oppose making it easier for corporations to poison their children. Last year, Gallup found that 62% of Americans believe the government is doing too little to protect the environment, the highest that figure has been in more than a decade. Meanwhile, some 57% of voters told the pollster that environmental protection should take priority over economic growth. And more such facts follow. If Blue Dogs want to steal a share of the spotlight from AOC, they could organize rallies protesting the most egregious of the Trump administration's environmental policies. If they're worried that their party's focus on anti-racism leaves white voters feeling like their issues don't count, they could denounce the president's demagoguery as a willful distraction meant to hypnotize culturally conservative Americans while his corporate cronies poison the air. Or if environmentalism isn't the Blue Dogs' bag, they could focus on Trump's lax approach to white-collar crime. The Democrats' burgeoning wing of affluent suburbanites might bristle at property tax hikes, but most have little sympathy for Trump's policy of making it easier for his fellow billionaires to evade taxes and then defraying some of the revenue loss by reducing their state and local tax deductions. Granted, some vulnerable Democratic lawmakers may believe that taking a confrontational stance toward the president or his party on an issue is not in their political interest. Rather, they may feel their voters want a representative who displays a thirst for bipartisanship and less enmity for Donald Trump than for liberal Democrats. Maybe some of them are right, but if that's the case, if all such Democrats have to offer is the most milquetoast of messaging bills and pay-ons to bipartisanship, then why would they ever expect their agenda to attract more media attention than the Squad? If your mission in politics is to cower from controversy, even on issues where your party has a clear advantage and your constituents have a vital interest, then you shouldn't be surprised when people aren't interested in all of the nothing that you have to say. I thought, pretty well put, worth adding to the pile here. And by the way, let's remember that though they did in fact finally pass the $15 federal minimum wage bill, there was a scare that they overcame with yet another motion to recommit that almost passed. And, if you are going to be screaming about the necessity of passing doomed messaging bills at this point instead of taking care of constitutional business, then you better make sure that you're not having to scramble for votes from Democrats to support that message. That's a pretty major portion of what you should be doing in terms of corralling votes. She corralled the votes that she needed to get the damn thing done, but it is worth noting that she's letting votes leak away there, and maybe there are even some freebies being given out. But again, if messaging is more important than what some regard as constitutional duty to confront the president on his high crimes and misdemeanors, then you better be messaging in earnest, is all I can say. All right. Let's see. Other things that we should probably make you aware of before the weekend closes out here. We will note that they did hold their votes on the floor for holding Barr and Ross in criminal contempt. Much good may it do us, and I sincerely hope so. Mostly party line vote there, 230 to 198. That's that. The House has voted to hold Attorney General William Barr and Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross in criminal contempt of Congress for failing to comply with congressional subpoenas in the House investigation of administration efforts to add that citizenship question to the 2020 census. That, according to Hunter's write-up of the happenings on, when did he do it? On the front page on Wednesday, but just for the record, no Republicans voted for the resolution. 4 Democrats voted against. But I guess we're not even doing messaging on that one, at least not for 4 Democrats. Sort of strange. Let's see. How about this one? Shall we? Let's see. We're running a little low on time here. Let me skim over a couple of these other items that were tucked away in the past few days and see if I can identify ones that are key for notes going into the weekend. Sure. How about this one? Let's do a little more Jeffrey Epstein, because we can never be done with that. Vanity Fair on this one. Gabriel Sherman, another great read almost every single time. It's going to be staggering. So here comes your weekend. Staggering. The amount of names. That's a quote. It's going to be staggering, the amount of names. As the Jeffrey Epstein case grows more grotesque, Manhattan and D.C. brace for impact. I haven't seen anything happen yet, but everybody brace for impact. The disgraced financier collected people, said a source. Could some of them be implicated in his crimes? Meanwhile, Alan Dershowitz, he's a bad person, and David, how do you pronounce it? His boys? I don't even know. He's a liar. They are already at war over the case, and I should figure out, I'll have to look at a interview on YouTube to get the pronunciation correct, because that's a name that comes up all the time. Those 2 guys are going bananas, by the way, and I think everybody was trading clips of Dershowitz. Somehow got it in his head that it would be a great idea to go on television and say that, and describe his sex life as being perfect, interestingly enough, but insisting to everybody, in addition to, if you weren't grossed out by finding out that he kept his underwear on, for sure, totally, during his massages, he wanted you to know, I've only had sex with one woman, my wife, and it's great. And how he thinks that's going to help things, I really have no idea. Anyway, this story, well, let's get right into it. The Jeffrey Epstein case is an asteroid poised to strike the elite world in which he moved. Unless it's a big conspiracy theory, as we learned earlier from Mother Jones. No one can yet say precisely how large it is, but as the number of women who've accused the financier, at least that's what he claimed to be, we're not sure if he's a financier, of sexual assault grows to grotesque levels, there are said to be more than 50 women who are potential victims. A wave of panic is rippling through Manhattan, D.C., and Palm Beach as Epstein's former friends and associates rush to distance themselves while gossiping about who might be ensnared. By the way, you know anybody whose major haunts are Manhattan, D.C., and Palm Beach? Donald Trump's Labor Secretary, Alexander Acosta, architected the original 2007 non-prosecution agreement that let him off with a wrist slap, has already been forced to resign. Questions about Epstein are metastasizing much faster than they can be answered. Who knew what about Epstein's alleged abuse? How and from whom did Epstein get his supposed $500 million fortune? He's down from billionaire now. Why did Acosta grant Epstein an outrageously lenient non-prosecution agreement? And what does it mean that Acosta was reportedly told Epstein belonged to intelligence? But among the most pressing queries is which other famous people might be exposed for committing sex crimes. There were other business associates of Mr. Epstein who engaged in improper misconduct at one or more of his homes. We do know that, said Brad Edwards, a lawyer for Courtney Wild, one of the Epstein accusers who gave emotional testimony at Epstein's bail hearing, which, by the way, he was denied yesterday, thankfully. In due time, the names are going to start coming out. Attorneys for Epstein did not respond to a request for comment. Likely within days, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit will release almost 2,000 pages of documents, that'll overwhelm the Cohen thing, that could reveal sexual abuse by, quote, numerous prominent American politicians. Wouldn't that be interesting news? As well as, numerous prominent American politicians, powerful business executives, foreign presidents, a well-known prime minister, and other world leaders, according to the 3-judge panel's ruling. The documents were filed during a civil defamation lawsuit brought by Epstein accuser Virginia Roberts Giuffre. We're not sure about that pronunciation either. The former Mar-a-Lago locker room attendant against Epstein's former girlfriend and alleged Madam Ghislaine Maxwell. Nobody who was around Epstein a lot is going to have an easy time now. It's all going to come out, said her lawyer, David, again, Boies. I've never been clear on that, and he's awfully famous. Another person involved with litigation against Epstein told me it's going to be staggering, the amount of names. It's going to be contagion numbers. Epstein remained a fixture in elite circles after he was a registered sex offender. Important to note, by the way. A few years ago, for example, he was a guest at a dinner in Palo Alto hosted by LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman for the MIT neuroscientist Ed Boyden. At the dinner, Elon Musk introduced Epstein to Mark Zuckerberg. Wow, good. Take them all. Mark met Epstein in passing one time at a dinner honoring scientists that was not organized by Epstein. Zuckerberg's spokesman Ben LeBolt told me. Mark did not communicate with Epstein again following the dinner. In an email, Elon Musk responded, I don't recall introducing Epstein to anyone, as I don't know the guy well enough to do so. Epstein is obviously a creep, and Zuckerberg is not a friend of mine. Blah, blah, blah. So here's another paragraph or two by way of excuse there. One source who's done business with Epstein told me that Epstein's 21,000 square foot townhouse in East 71st Street welcomed the steady stream of the Davos crowd in the past decade, and that appears to be true. The source said Bill Gates, Larry Summers, and Steve Bannon visited the house, which has been called one of the largest private residences in Manhattan. Jeffrey collected people. That's what he did, the source said. Gates and Summers did not respond to a request for comment. What about Bannon? Maybe they never asked him. Thus far, the name most publicly associated with Epstein's alleged crimes is famed lawyer Alan Dershowitz, who's been waging a public battle with David Boies for years. They're going back and forth, and there's a whole lot of stories about just how deep and down in the mud they're getting. Many more names here, many more paragraphs full of stories here. The bolded names really cover just about everything. Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, Les Wexner, Leon Black, George W. Bush, Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, just a few of the, well, I think that's all the bolded names there. What they were doing and what they're implicated in, I don't know. We'll find out over the weekend, and if you do, you'll say I was at least on notice thanks to the Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Here's what he's got on tap. Rand Paul whined about Jon Stewart being so mean while fighting for 9/11 first responders. Trump officials buried a report meant to help farmers because it mentioned climate change. The White House trying to sabotage a deal that would ward off financial market chaos. And Bill Barr gave the Senate GOP
from Daily Kos Radio
a ton of cash just before they voted to confirm him.
You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Going abroad now, Canadian police arrested 9 members of a powerful mafia clan with roots in southern Italy. And the new Moldovan prime minister said her first issue on the agenda is the de-oligarchization of the state. Tall order there. Good luck to you and the Canadian mob.